My daughter-in-law told me 40 of her relatives were coming to my farm for Thanksgiving, and then she told me where I'd be sleeping. Not in my own room, in the caretaker's cottage. No heat. Space heaters only, because Vanessa's father needed my bed for his back. I was standing in my kitchen, peeling an apple in the house my grandfather built in 1928. 96 acres. 11,000 apple trees. My late wife Ruth had turned a roadside stand into a business that once employed 29 people. And my son Owen sat at the table with his laptop open, saying nothing, while his wife rearranged my house like she owned it. "When were you planning to ask if I wanted 40 guests?" I said. "They're not guests, they're family. Most of them have never met me." She wanted the silver polished. She wanted the family photographs taken down from the dining room, Ruth's photograph, the one from our 30th anniversary, because, in her words, they made the room feel private asterisk. She wanted it to feel welcoming asterisk. I dried my hands and asked a simple question. What time were they arriving? She thought it meant I'd given in. It didn't. 2 days earlier, a courier had delivered a box of linen napkins to my cider house, embroidered with a gold apple tree, and the words Founders Table asterisk. Billed to a company I'd never heard of, Cedar Run Retreats. Delivered to my address. Ordered back in June, 5 months before anyone said a word to me about a resort. Then a banker named Audrey Collins called. She was verifying a source of equity statement listing me as the land contributor to something called the Cedar Hospitality Project. Land valuation, $8.6 million. Did I understand the terms? I told her I hadn't contributed land to anything. Had I signed an option and development authorization dated August 14th? No, I had not. My attorney, Margaret Shaw, pulled the document, 17 pages. A luxury resort, 32 cottages, a spa, a wedding pavilion built where our oldest trees stood. Page 14 carried my signature authorizing the transfer. It was mine. Lifted, pixel for pixel, scanner defect and all from a 2022 equipment lease. Underneath it, Owen listed as managing member. Vanessa, Chief Development Officer. Her father, Malcolm, Chairman of the founding investors. Option price, $8.6 million. Option fee, $10. My son had priced my life's work at $10 and put his name where mine should have been. They'd also raised money. Investor units at $25,000 apiece, sold on the promise that they controlled land they had never owned, using my house, my orchard. And photographs of my wife's Rose Garden as collateral for other people's trust. Over $800,000 sat in an escrow account. Another $380,000 had moved somewhere the bank couldn't see. 41 names on the investor list. Almost all of them Vanessa's relatives. All 40 of them were coming to my table for Thanksgiving. Margaret's advice was simple: cancel the dinner. But if I canceled, they'd tell everyone a confused old man had gotten cold feet. A forged signature would become a family disagreement about succession. So I chose the harder path. I would host it. I would feed all 40 of them, and I would let the evidence walk itself into my dining room. We set the terms. I signed nothing, threatened no one, made no promises to investors. Margaret notified the bank, recorded an affidavit disputing the option, and sought an emergency order freezing any transfer of the land. My controller, Neil, quietly preserved every email. My orchard manager, Rosa, secured the deed files and inventoried the equipment. When I called the bank myself, the news was worse than I expected. $98,000 had already been released from escrow, approved using my forged signature, to an outfit called VPM Hospitality Strategies. Vanessa Porter Mercer. Her own company paid from money meant for the land she didn't own. Neil found more. Company drone photography used for investor materials, marketing time. A $22,000 invoice from a design firm, coded as if it were bottle labels, paid from Cedar Run's own accounts. $8,000 of it kicked back to Vanessa as a referral fee. And someone using Owen's login had downloaded my driver's license, 3 years of tax returns, and Ruth's death certificate. That last one told me everything. They were building a closing file. They needed proof I was gone, or as good as gone, to make the ownership chain look complete. Malcolm and Judith arrived first, towing a trailer of wine and presentation folders, 46 of them, stamped with a gold apple tree. Big day Thursday, Malcolm said, clapping my shoulder like I was staff. That night, Vanessa told me the cottage was ready. I told her I'd be sleeping in my own room. You know Owen is going to own this place eventually, she said. Not a legal claim. Something colder, my death, spoken of as a delayed transfer date. Wednesday morning, I called an emergency board meeting. Margaret sat at the table with conflict disclosures signed. I laid the memorandum in front of Owen. He wouldn't touch it. I asked who authorized it. It's a concept, he said. A diversification plan. I asked who authorized raising money from his wife's family using my land. He said they were sophisticated investors. I asked where the missing $380,000 went. He said the bank had the records. The bank had $742,000 frozen and no clean answer for the rest. I placed the 2022 lease beside page 14. Same signature, same scanner mark. You copied it, I said. I didn't prepare the file. Your company has 2 managers. You and your wife. The board suspended him, access to systems, property records, any authority to represent the company, 4 votes to 1. He walked out and told Vanessa I was staging an ambush. I told Rosa to lock the chemical shed, secure the vehicles, and post supervisors at the cider house. Then I went home to receive 40 people for Thanksgiving. They came in minivans and rented SUVs, and 1 motor home parked on Ruth's rose garden. Architectural renderings got unrolled beneath Ruth's photograph. When I refused to fetch towels for guests I hadn't invited, Owen said, loud enough for the room, "You suspended me in front of employees. You're confused about what you signed." That sentence wasn't for me. It was for the 40 witnesses standing around us. I asked him to tell everyone the date I supposedly signed. He didn't answer. I asked Malcolm how much money he'd put in. $350,000, he admitted, after telling his wife it was 100. Judith dropped the blanket she was holding. That night someone tried my locked bedroom door at 11:20. Owen's voice, soft through the wood, "We just need you to tell the bank you signed it. Then this all goes away." I didn't answer. He told me I was 72 and asked how long I planned to hold on to everything. I told him, long enough to decide what happens to what I built. He told me I'd built it for family. I told him I'd built it with people whose names were on paychecks, not just a family tree. At 4:45 Thanksgiving morning, I found Vanessa in my kitchen wearing Ruth's apron. With a cooking schedule that put my name beside 11 tasks under the heading asterisk, Founder's Thanksgiving Service. I took the apron back. She told me the money was protected. I told her $742,000 was frozen and $98,000 was gone, and asked where the first $380,000 went. "Startup costs," she said. "My fee, 9 months unpaid." Then Rosa called. A notary, Vanessa's cousin Tessa, had been summoned to the gate at 6 that morning with her stamp and her journal. Her seal already appeared on the option, certifying that I had personally appeared before her on August 14th at 2:20 in the afternoon. At 2:20 that day, I had been 30 minutes away under a surgical drape, having a procedure done on my eye. Owen had driven me. Vanessa had picked me up. I went down to the gate myself. Tessa was crying before I even asked. She hadn't watched me sign anything. Vanessa had told her I'd signed at home, and it would be cruel to drag me out again after eye surgery. Tessa backdated the stamp 2 days after the fact. In exchange, she and her husband had been given a $5,000 credit toward a founder unit, and had put in $20,000 more of their own money on top of it. That morning, Vanessa had texted her, "Bring journal. Frank will sign after dinner. Dad says investors need a clean record before Monday." They hadn't invited Tessa to fix a mistake. They'd summoned her to manufacture one, in a house full of 40 people who trusted the paperwork. By early afternoon, Owen tried to drive off with 2 bankers' boxes of company sales records. Rosa stopped him at the gate and reminded him the preservation notice was already in his inbox. He carried them back inside himself. At 2:45, 46 chairs filled my dining room and library. A navy folder sat at every place. Malcolm stood by a screen showing an aerial render of my orchard buried under white cottages and a glass pavilion over Ruth's roses. He raised his glass to our new $8.6 million resort. I didn't raise mine. "Before anyone drinks to ownership," I said, standing, How many of you invested because you were told Cedar Run Retreats controlled my farm? 31 hands went up. Keep them up if you spoke to me directly before investing. Every hand came down. I held up the equipment lease beside page 14 and asked the room to look at the small gray scanner mark above the R in Mercer. It was in both, identical. The file was downloaded from our system in June using Owen's login, I said. Vanessa called it a family conversation. I asked who else had heard me approve anything. No one answered. That's when the doorbell rang. Margaret Shaw walked in with a forensic accountant and a process server and served Owen and Vanessa on the spot. A restraining order, a preservation notice, formal dispute of the land option. Vanessa said the money never left escrow. Owen closed the laptop, then reopened his mouth and said something worse than any of it. That I was 72, grieving, not entirely reliable, and this was a capacity issue, not fraud. He had rehearsed that line. Margaret answered it cold, a cognitive evaluation that September had found no impairment. And the notary's own signed statement said I had never appeared before her. That medical records placed me at the hospital at the exact hour she'd claimed to witness my signature. Tessa's own mother, sitting at that table, asked where her daughter was. At a motel with counsel, Margaret said, because Vanessa asked her this morning to backdate the record. The forensic accountant put the money trail on the screen. 1.22 million raised. 742,000 frozen. 161,000 unaccounted for, 60,000 of it a deposit on a Richmond condo, titled in Vanessa's name alone. Owen turned on his own wife in front of everyone. She turned right back. I stood at the head of my own table and said the only thing that felt honest. The food shouldn't go to waste, and no one was required to stay, but starting the next morning. Margaret and the accountant would meet every investor individually to go through the real numbers. Then I told Owen and Vanessa they had until Sunday at 5 to vacate the cottage. Vanessa asked where she was supposed to go. I told her the Richmond condo might be available. We ate. 90 minutes mostly silence, the quietest Thanksgiving that house had ever hosted. Later, Owen walked with me between the bare rose beds and told me a York apple tree, planted the day he was born, was scheduled for removal in February, split trunk, no longer worth saving. You keep dying things because they have a story, he said. I told him the whole row was being replanted with better rootstock, and that I'd have Rosa save him a piece of the wood. Then I told him the truth as plainly as I could. He would never manage this farm while I was alive, and he shouldn't build his future around inheriting it when I died. He told me then he guessed he wasn't my son anymore. I told him he didn't get to resign from that to dodge being my employee. The investigation ran 11 months. A receiver took over the retreat company's accounts. Investors eventually recovered 89 cents on every dollar, not whole, but not nothing. Malcolm sold his lake house to help cover the gap and quietly repaid relatives he'd personally promised were safe. Tessa surrendered her notary license and pleaded guilty to filing a false certificate. She testified against the very family that had asked her to do it. Buried in the company servers, investigators found a June email from Owen. This scan is clean enough. Use only the signature page. If Dad sees the full option before founder commitments, he'll stop it. There was no more room for the story that he'd been swept along. By February, Owen and Vanessa were living apart. In March, the board formally terminated Owen for falsifying records and misusing company funds. He kept his ownership shares. But any future payout would first have to satisfy what a court found he owed the company. I rewrote the succession plan so no single person could ever again hold this land hostage to one relationship. An independent trustee structure, a conservation easement on the working orchard, a path for employees to eventually own a real stake in the company. Not revenge, just a lock that couldn't be picked by a marriage. In the fall, Vanessa pleaded guilty to fraud and to running an unlawful securities offering. She admitted, on the record, to knowingly using my copied signature. Owen pleaded guilty to conspiracy and misuse of company property. At his sentencing, I told the court plainly, my son didn't take my land, the bank stopped that before it closed. What he took was trust, from people who believed his last name made his promises safe. and he used my age as a weapon both ways, capable enough to sign when it suited him. Too old to be believed when I objected. I told the judge this wasn't a family misunderstanding. Families misunderstand who was supposed to bring the chairs. A copied signature and a false notary stamp are choices. When Owen stood to speak, for the first time he didn't blame the plan or his wife or me. "I chose it," he said, and his voice broke on it. Outside the courtroom, he apologized, not to change the sentence, not to change the estate plan, just because, in his words, he'd made my death feel useful to him. I told him I was working toward not carrying hatred, and that was the honest answer I had that day. Then I hugged him anyway, because some things are still true even after a courtroom has finished with the facts. The following Thanksgiving, 18 people came instead of 40. No founder folders. No projector over Ruth's photograph. Judith came alone for dessert. Malcolm stayed home, not banned, just not ready. Owen's daughter Sophie handed me a letter he'd written from the work release program, where he was learning bookkeeping and paying restitution a little at a time. He wrote that the worst thing he'd ever learned about himself wasn't that he might lose the farm. It was that he'd made his own father disappear in his own house before he ever put a single forged paper down on the table. He asked for nothing, not forgiveness scheduled in advance, not a place held open, just the truth written plainly for once. That night, after everyone left, I put his letter in the hall drawer, next to a child's red mitten someone had left behind the year the 40 relatives came, and never came back the same way again. The drawer didn't lock. Some things, I've decided, don't need to be locked to be protected. They just need to be true.